Okay, so I was hoping to get some feedback on an app I recently created for a work need. Basically, we're a nonprofit and we do a volunteer tax preparation program. So we have an employee who schedules all the appointments. We have about, I want to say around 9 to 10 volunteer tax preparers. At three different locations, and we serve about 1,400-ish people um, during the tax season. So I wanted to start off with how the process was currently managed and talk a little bit about what we did in Salesforce and see if anyone has any thoughts on it. So I've censored this best I can, but hopefully you're able to see it's just basically an Outlook calendar. We put appointments in, and if they're open, we can edit them and update the person. So you see open appointments, open 3 Mile. It's kind of a bit of a mess, and there's no real way to filter this without creating 10 different Outlook calendars or 12 different Outlook calendars for each tax preparer we had. So there's really 3 people involved, well, 3 groups of people. There's our tax scheduler, who's an employee, who handles all the phone calls and gets the actual appointments down. We have our volunteer tax preparers, and then we have obviously all the customers, which is about 1,400 over around a 4-month period. So I thought what might make sense is just show the change set. This is currently in a sandbox. We'll start here, and we'll kind of go through each role and what the app does for them. So basically, we only had one custom object in this, just a tax appointment, and we're just going to look up to the contact. So it's not overly complex. We do have a packet we need them to complete, so we need to send that out somehow. We always have our start dates and times. We want to keep our process the same. So it's just the one app that we ended up creating for this. And one of the things that we found that we really liked was a better calendar in Salesforce. So if you look at one of our tax appointments, if we create a new one here, basically we put a number of fields. We have our name. And there's a naming convention on this, so I'm not going to do anything. I'm just going to type in a B. We have a start date and time. You may be wondering where the end date and time is. And then we have our tax provider, and we'll put a filter on this lookup, but we'll just use Jim Tax Provider for an example. Then you'll also notice there's some other things here, like the contact who's doing the appointment, which we'll talk about in a second. Let's put this date in the future. So we have the contact who's doing the appointment. We have how we're going to send our packet. Basically, when you have a contact, if you put an email, it rifles out an email. We'll have a mail need to send and then a mail sent that we'll just modify from a list view each day and make sure those go out. And then we have a status, which mostly updates automatically. Then we have this location field as well, which is also automatic. So let me go ahead and save this. As you can see, it renamed to Tax Provider Open. We have our start date and time. The status is open, and we also have an end date and time. That's an hour and a half. And the location was filled in. So I did use some workflows for this, and basically all of our tax preparers, I want the user here, have, most of them work out of one location. There's one guy who goes back and forth between a few. So what I did is I created a few fields. One, we have a default appointment length, and then we also have a default location. So if you leave the appointment length open and the location open, it'll just fill these in automatically. It's a high volume position. We want to make it as easy as possible. And different tax preparers can take a different amount of time. So in this particular case, Larry's a lot faster. His are only 45 minutes, but Jim runs about an hour and a half. I'll go through the process builder on how that was set. This is basically how that's done. And then as far as the status is concerned, if you add a contact to it, so let's go ahead and add myself to it. And I can show you what happens if we send out an email, the packet delivery, and press save. You'll notice that the status will jump to booked. And if for some reason I decide not to take it, and we'll set the packet delivery to none, rip that out, the status should jump back to open. So that's just a process builder that basically maps those two. Point being to make sure that we're sending out the right information and we don't have appointments that don't need to be open. So I don't know of any implications of this, but it would be good to hear. And then the other status is if you want to mark things as complete, you can. Cancel as we cancel them internally, and no shows obviously the person didn't show up. So if you did remember, I did put my name with packet delivery email. We don't have our tax packet yet, but basically this just rifles out an email with a packet for the person to complete if they're on the phone. So generally speaking, that's how our scheduler is preparing. And then if we go back to the calendar using this, they're able to filter on a number of criteria, right? So they can look at all tax appointments if they want to. So this is everything. They can look at all Jim's appointments, Larry's, or just everything open on a week-by-week basis. And I just think this is a much easier way than that cluttered calendar. Makes all the clicks a lot simpler. And a lot of times a lot of people have been coming here for 10, 20 years and they want to work with Jim, or they want to work with Larry. Which obviously trying to dig through the Outlook version could take a lot longer to schedule at a time. One of the things that I figured would probably happen, as nice as it would be to, let's pick a different week actually. Let's just go into our bunch on the 21st. So as nice as it would be to have some way to block it, we're a little bit concerned about someone having duplicate appointments, and we know our tax preparer is going fast. So I did make a matching rule, but it doesn't block the action, it just reports it. So that is in the duplicate matching. I believe that's here. Which we set up to do that to make sure that I'm at least getting a report to be able to say, hey, can you update these statuses of old appointments? And I'll be able to tell from the naming convention. So that at least keeps us on top of whether or not someone is showing. Alright, so this was the duplicate rule I was talking about. So there's two. There's duplicate, and then there has to be a matching rule on top of that. And I'll show you the report it provides. Basically, I just wanted to know if the contact IDs were identical. We already have matching rules in place for duplicate contacts, so if I have someone with a first and last name that's the same, or two people with an email that's the same, I already get this report, and this is something I stay on top of pretty regularly. And then also, we have the matching rule, which uses the criteria. But if we look at the duplicate rule again, I just use the report and not the alerts. The alerts were obviously causing the workflows while the process builders not to fire, which is never good. And then if we look at our duplicate record sets, as you can see, there's 7 duplicate Rob booked different tax appointments because I use that contact all the time. So obviously that's a bad example, but I am able to stay on top of any duplication. So if you remember what I mentioned up front was that we do have a lot of different locations, and we have a lot of people, and right now we're handling all of them through the phone. So we wanted to extend Salesforce into the Community Cloud. So this is basically, go back to these tax appointments. And we'll just take a look at this really quick. So if you notice, I'm the owner, and this will be our tax scheduler once we have that person. The tax provider is Jim, tax provider. Jim can basically see this appointment if we log into the community as him. And we can walk through the community sharing settings. But they're kind of boring. Basically, external access, a little different than internal access. So Jim can see all of his tax appointments, whatever status they might be. And basically, when we set the status to open, it changes the owner from our tax scheduler into another like open user, which is a community user. So basically the community pricing is based off of logins, so it's not really dinging us anything. And this is really the whole community. I want to keep it as simple as possible. Jim can now look at his appointments, and let's say Jim can't make it on the 28th at 12. He can just edit this and change the status to canceled, right? So now we know not to schedule Jim. The owner just got switched to Rob Hansen, which is me. And I'll show you what happens. And let's say, oh, you know what, I'm feeling better. I'll come in, open. Now it's open tax prep again. And we'll show you what this looks like from the perspective of a customer, and then we'll walk through all the different automation that it took to get this to happen. So if you look at this from a customer perspective, go ahead and let Rob over here log into the community. You can see he can only see the open appointments. And I uploaded a bunch of these. Let's do this January 1st one. So looking at this, press edit below, then press check the box to register. There will be a packet sent to you an email, and you fill it out. It pops up right away. This does. I put it here too. It's just kind of how the communities are structured. If anyone knows how to do this, that'd be fantastic. I have not found anything without some pretty advanced Apex work. But basically all they have to do is press edit, check register me, hit save. And this should, tax appointment Jim Open was saved. And then they get their email confirmation. If you scheduled for an appointment on this date at this time with Jim, please complete the attached pack and either email it back or bring it in with you. So they'll get all that. And the appointment then goes to the status of booked. So if we go back to Jim, he would see that as a booked appointment. And obviously be a duplicate again, so it would go on my list. So it's really only one click. They can self-register for this community pretty easily. Click that one button and they're able to register for tax appointments. Which hopefully will eventually take a ton of work off of our tax scheduler who is taking all those calls. And should make their lives a bit easier. The tax preparers can now see all their appointments from home or from wherever. Where it was more, they would come and have a printout. So if they need to make a change at the last minute, they can do that as well. So yeah, if you're an automation fan, I'll be going through basically all the automation that we have to do. So it's not a huge number, it's just a handful. I like the process builder. I know everyone has their own feature. Some people are a little more old school and use workflows. I like the cross-object work, and I tend to do a bunch of choppy ones. You could probably combine some of these, but if you ever get that error message, it's really difficult to read sometimes. So this is the one that set the tax appointment to open. This is how the checkbox is done. So basically, real simple criteria. If this is checked, it updates the contact and the tax, because basically whenever you register for a community, it creates contact, automatically sets a pick list, packet delivery to email, which rifles out that other email, and then it references this last modified by contact ID, which sets the contact to the person that did it. So I'm trying to think of any other. These are really overly complex. And for the most part, this one emails the packets. This one does the naming convention. This defaults the tax date. It used to be 1 hour. It actually now, if you want to see how this one works, because I didn't know a ton about these. Basically, this is just a formula that if the start date, if the end date is null and the start date is not null, it sets it to this formula. So it's just date, time, value. You have to make this into a value. Tax appointment start date and time plus, so that takes the start date and it adds their standard length over 24. So you can activate this. It's not hurt anyone. But that's basically how that sets it. So that's pretty much the whole app. Just to recap, it does take an Outlook calendar, puts it into a Salesforce calendar. Right, so that packet automatically allows us to track a lot of things. We get all Salesforce's great reporting, and it's putting in all these awesome contacts. So the final process that I wanted to cover was this one, which basically sets the user contact to the reports to field. So we're all B2C, and I've just hijacked this for sandbox purposes. But it's the reports to field, which can look up to someone else, and we'll show how external sharing works, or at least how I was able to get different things to work in different ways. But basically, this just sets if the user profile ID is our tax customer profile. So there's a separate customer profile, preparer profile, and a scheduler profile. It just sets their reports to ID to that open tax prep user. So it's not an overly complicated process. But if you're not familiar with external access versus internal access, basically this is what we're looking at for communities, and this is what you look at for everything else. And if you set the external access to public read-write, or, well, public just read-only, or private, it will allow you to create a separate sharing rule for your community, and each profile can have a different sharing rule. So in our community settings, basically I set up a few different rules, and I may change that reports to field. I just use it for the purpose of sandboxing. That probably will get changed, and these aren't that complicated to change either. So there's two. There's one for the tax provider and the tax customer. So tax customers, if you notice the report to, you can see if the user contact reports to is the same as the tax appointment owner contact. So that's why open appointments have the owner of open tax prep, and not open appointments have myself as the owner. So they can only see those particular records. And then the tax preparers actually use that lookup to the tax provider, so that's why I use a user lookup, a contact lookup. So this one gives them access to if the user contact is the same as the tax appointment tax provider contact, and that's why we use that filter lookup for that. So that's basically the only rule I'd set up to make the external sharing model the way that it is, so that some users can see all contacts, and some users can see all open appointments, and other users can just see their own appointments. It's not a standard hierarchy. It's just a different external sharing model. So that's basically how we're able to keep everything separated. is through all those process builders that kind of set the user, and that's why there's two different owners dependent on what's happening. So yeah, this does quite a bit for us. This lets us basically take a huge amount of work potentially. We can get the customers to register on their own off our tax scheduler. It lets our tax providers update their availability in real time, or cancel any appointments, or if they want to add some, maybe they want to chip in an extra day, they could do that as well. And it gives us, our calendar is much more organized under this model. And there's also other things that we can do with this. Making large updates, for example, if someone needs to switch from one person to another, it's not difficult to go in there and kind of grab all the appointments in a list view and do a mass inline edit. And it should give us a ton of reporting.